بيان حكم من يتلفظ بلفظ الكفر, clarification of the rule concerning anyone who pronounces an expression of blasphemy بغير سبق لسان, without a slip of the tongue, وأنه يخرج من الإسلام, and that such a person goes out of Islam. إن كان غير مكره بالقتل ونحوه, if this one were not compelled, not forced, not coerced, يعني not under a threat of death and the like of death, under the threat of death or a similar threat. اعلم أن الألفاظ قسمان, know that the expressions, the statements, are of two divisions. صريح, the first one is called صريح, explicit, blatant, frank, clear. ليس له إلا وجه واحد, it only has one way in meaning. It only means one thing. وظاهر, and apparent. That means seeming, what it looks like. يحتمل معنيين, it bears two meanings. أحدهما أقرب من الآخر, and what makes it apparent blasphemy is that one of its meanings is, or what makes it an apparent statement, rather. What makes it an apparent statement? So we're saying statements are of two types. Explicit statements, they only have one way, they only mean one thing. And apparent statements bearing two meanings, one of which is closer than the other. That's what makes it apparent, because there's something it seems to mean, but doesn't have to be. Could mean something else. But of what it means, there's something that stands out. And so, for example, if someone were to say, in God's hands, so what appears from that statement is organs. That's what it seems to say, but doesn't have to mean that. Oh, huma mutasawiyan, Sheikh says, or those two meanings are the same. They are at the same level. Neither one of them is more apparent than the other. So here, this last one, or the two meanings have the same, neither of them is more apparent than the other. That one is not usually called apparent blasphemy. What appears here from the Sheikh's statement is that he includes under apparent blasphemy, under zahir, apparent I keep saying blasphemy here. Yeah, we're talking about blasphemy, but I'm trying to keep it open here. Apparent statements. So know that the expressions are two divisions. Explicit statements, they only have one way. And apparent. So he said qisman, two. He gave one explicit and he gave the other apparent, zahir. And then he defined the zahir. يحتمل معنيين أحدهما أقرب من الآخر. It bears two meanings, one of which is closer than the other, is more the seeming meaning, more apparent. That's why it's called zahir. But now here in Sheikh's statement, he says, أو هما متساويان, or the two meanings of the statement are equal. Not one of them is more apparent than the other. So it looks like here that the Sheikh has included under apparent blasphemy what has يحتمل معنيين, what has two meanings, possibly bearing two meanings. يحتمل معنيين هما متساويان, that are both equal. Usually that's not called ظاهر. That's called the third type, which is muhtamal. Muhtamal. It means possibly bearing more than one meaning equally. Possibly bearing more than one meaning equally. That's not usually called zahir. Zahir is what that's, of all of its meanings, something stands out more than something else. Yes. Muhtamal. MUH underline TAMAL. Muhtamal comes from this very word right here in the sentence. يحتمل معنيين. It possibly bears two meanings, but when neither of those two meanings is more the seeming meaning, then it's not usually called zahir, it's usually called muhtamal. So Sheikh here, he didn't separate those. That's what appears from the Sheikh's statement. That there's two types of statements: explicit statements and apparent statements. And then he broke apparent into two types. What has two meanings and one is more likely or more apparent than the other? Or its two meanings are the same in strength. Now, so if we wanted to say this in a different way, we could say there's two types of expressions: explicit statements, and so that means they only have one meaning, and muhtamal, statements bearing more than one meaning. Then either huma mutasawiyan, both of those meanings are equal, or the statement would be zahir, one of those meanings is more apparent than the other. So anyway, that's clear now, insha'Allah ta'ala. An example of muhtamal is this verb in Arabic called fi'l mudari'. The fi'l mudari' verb in Arabic, which is the present tense verb or the future tense verb. If you say af'alu, that could mean I do, or it could mean I shall do. It could be either one. Neither one is more apparent. The present is not more apparent than the future when it comes to this type of verb in Arabic. It's muhtamal, possibly bearing two meanings. Neither meaning is more apparent than the other. فمن نطق بالكفر الصريح وهو عامد. So anyone who pronounced explicit, frank, clear, straightforward blasphemy on purpose. Yani he said what he meant to say. أي بغير سبق اللسان, meaning without the slip of the tongue. وغير مكره, and without being compelled. وعالم بمعنى اللفظ, and while knowing the meaning of the expression. فهذا يكفر, this is the one who blasphemes. سواء كان نطقه من باب السب لله, whether what he pronounced was a case of insulting God, أو للرسول, or the messenger, أو لغيره من الأنبياء, or any other prophets, أو الملائكة, or the angels, أو سب شريعة الإسلام, أو سب شريعة الإسلام, or it was an insult offered towards the sacred law of Islam. أو من باب إنكار ما علم من الدين بالضرورة, or if it were a case of denying something that is known in the religion by necessity. ولا يدخله التأويل, and this type of statement, an explicit one, cannot have any alternative explanation. لأنه لو كان يدخله التأويل لتعطل تطبيق أحكام الردة, because had an explicit statement of blasphemy been something that accepts an alternative explanation, then this would have itself dismantled application of the rules of apostasy. It would have single handedly dismantled applying the rules of apostasy. وتلفظ من يشاء بما يشاء من الصريح, and then anyone who wanted to say an explicit statement of blasphemy would have said whatever he wanted to say. ثم يقول كلامي له تأويل, then he would just say, what I said has an alternative explanation. وهذا باب من الفوضى كبير, and this is a big door for chaos in religion. فلا ينظر بعد كون اللفظ صريحا إلى قصد الشخص. So, after the statement being an explicit one, there's no consideration given to the person's intention. After the statement being explicit, meaning after the explicit, excuse me, after the frankness of this statement is confirmed, then you don't look at the intention of the person. So Sheikh gave examples. One of them is the insult. So what makes this very easy to understand is to give an example of someone who insults another's mother. So you say, oh, your mom, she's such a horse. So then you say, huh? Would you say, what do you mean? Don't say, what do you mean? You might say, what do you mean? But maybe you mean, what's wrong with you? But you don't say, really, what do you mean? And you say, and the meaning of your question is, what's the explanation of your statement? What's the meaning of those words? Because it's explicit, it's clear. He's insulting your mother. So then you don't see what's his intention there. That's the meaning of, you don't look at his intention. You don't take the words when they are clear. And then you say, what did you mean? What did you intend? Yes, I said horse. Are you going to give that a ta'wil? Do you have a ta'wil for that? What does that mean? Hardworking? Your mom's so hardworking. Oh, what I meant when I said your mom's a horse, I meant she works so hard. Do you think that one's really going to fly, though? That's an honest question. If you said that to any person, I guess you could say, if there's a context, like his mom works in the factory and she puts in 14 hours a day.
Salaam alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
I think they might be trying to say she's kind of thick, if they call her a horse.
Okay. So how about dog then? Your mom's dog, if someone said. So that's very explicit. So if somebody said your mom's a dog, then that's very clear. That's an insult. You don't say what does that mean. So فلا ينظر بعد كون اللفظ صريحا إلى قصد الشخص. So after the confirmation of that being a straightforward statement of blatant blasphemy, you don't look at the person's intention. So, in other words, had he said, I don't like God, you don't say, well, what does that mean? Say that's blasphemy, because the meaning is clearer. That's blasphemy. ولا إلى معرفته بحكم تلك الكلمة أنها تخرج من الإسلام. Nor do you consider that this, whether this person knows the judgment of what he said, that it takes a person out of Islam for saying it. That's not considered also. Rather, what's going to be considered in this case if, is if he understands the language in the first place. If he understands the language in the first place, that's what you're going to consider. Not what his intention was when he said it. Those are two different things. When it comes to explicit, you're going to check his understanding of the language. أما أن الصريح لا يؤول. And concerning a frank statement of blasphemy not being open to a reinterpretation, فقد ذكر ذلك غير واحد من الأصوليين. More than one scholar of fundamentals mentioned that. كما نقل ذلك عنهم إمام الحرمين الجويني. Just as Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni logged about those scholars. وأقرهم على ذلك, and he agreed with them about that. ففي كتاب نهاية المحتاج, in the book نهاية المحتاج ما نصه quote ونقل الإمام عن الأصوليين أن إضمار التورية أي فيما لا يحتملها كما هو واضح لا يفيد. The Imam, meaning Imam al-Haramain, he logged about the scholars of the fundamentals that harboring a double meaning, that means you said something explicit and in your heart you mean something else. You mean something that's not what you said means. So harboring a double meaning, أي فيما لا يحتملها, meaning concerning something that doesn't bear another meaning, harboring another meaning for something that does not bear another meaning, as is obvious, لا يفيد is pointless, doesn't benefit. فيكفر باطنا أيضا. So this person would inwardly be a blasphemer also. Yani what he harbored inside of a double meaning doesn't help. لحصول التهاون منه, because of the neglect that he fell into. Because of the neglect that he fell into. So that's a case that happens sometimes. When would you find someone falling into this case? When a person doesn't have enough guts to stand up for himself concerning his religious position. And he found himself, from his own perspective, having to say blasphemy, explicit blasphemy. He doesn't really want to say it. But he doesn't for himself find a way out of saying it. So what can he do then? And he doesn't have the heart to not say it, and he doesn't have the heart to stand up for himself. Then he's going to say it, and then in his own heart, he's going to be meaning something else. And here, this is not going to help him because really what he's saying doesn't mean that other meaning that he's harboring. Then how's that going to come out? Then someone's going to be there and see the situation, or he's going to convey that to someone what happened to him. And then someone's going to say to him, that's kufr. And then he would say, well, what I meant was, and then his explanation doesn't even mean, yani, it's not something accepted by what he said. The meaning that he claims he meant is not accepted by the words that he said. And then hopefully he'll listen to you and say his shahada. انتهى, end quote. وفي تفسير القرطبي, and it is documented in Al-Qurtubi's interpretation of the Quran. He's a Maliki. عند تفسير قوله تعالى, when interpreting what God said, يا أيها النبي قل لمن في أيديكم من الأسرى, in the 70th ayah of Surah Al-Anfal, which means, O Prophet, say to the prisoners that you have, say to the prisoners that you have, ila akhir al-ayah, etc., until the end of this ayah. So this is the ayah that Al-Qurtubi was commenting on. What we want is the talk of Al-Qurtubi. This talk of Al-Qurtubi, you can find it in his tafsir, his interpretation book, under the interpretation of the 70th ayah of Surah Al-Anfal. Ma nasuhu, quote, Qala ulama'una, our scholars said, In takallama al-kafiru bil-imani fi qalbihi, had a disbeliever talk to himself about believing, wa bilisanihi, and he talked to himself, had he talked to himself about believing in his heart, had he been in his heart conflicted thinking about believing, considering that, and he talked about it to himself with his tongue, وَلَمْ يُمْضِ فِيهِ عَزِيمَةً, but he never followed through. لَمْ يَكُنْ مُؤْمِنًا, he would not be a believer. وَإِذَا وُجِدَ مِثْلُ ذَلِكَ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِ, and had such a thing been found from a believer, yani someone who was a believer or was considered as one, كَانَ كَافِرًا, he would really then be a disbeliever. إِلَّا مَا كَانَ مِنَ الْوَسْوَسَةِ, except in the case of being haunted by the whispers of the devil. التي لا يقدر على دفعها, those whispers that one cannot repel. فإن الله قد عفى عنها وأسقطها, Allah made being haunted by those whispers overlooked for the person, as long as he doesn't give in to them. I'm not sure which century Al-Qurtubi was in. وقال أيضا, and he also said, عند شرح قوله تعالى, when explaining what God said in the 65th verse of Surah At-Tawbah, وَلَئِن سَأَلْتَهُمْ لَيَقُولُنَّ إِنَّمَا كُنَّا نَخُوضُ وَنَلْعَبُ, and if you were to ask them, they would by God say, we were only indulging and playing. قُلْ أَبِاللَّهِ وَآيَاتِهِ وَرَسُولِهِ كُنْتُمْ تَسْتَهْزِئُونَ. Say, Muhammad, is it God and his verses and his messenger that you belittle? مَا نَصُّهُ, quote, قال القاضي أبو بكر بن العربي. Judge Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi said, لا يخلو أن يكون ما قالوه من ذلك جدا أو هزلا. Whatever one said in such a case would either be seriously or jokingly. وهو كيفما كان كفر, and whichever way it were, it's blasphemy. فإن الهزل بالكفر كفر, because joking about blasphemy is still blasphemy. لا خلاف فيه بين الأمة. There's no difference about that in the nation. انتهى. End quote. وقال الإمام حبيب بن الربيع, and Imam Habib ibn al-Rabi' said, وهو أحد كبار المالكية, and he's one of the Maliki greats, المتوسطين بين المتقدمين منهم والمتأخرين, one of those in the middle between the early ones and the later ones. وهو من أصحاب الوجوه الذين يستخرجون الأحكام بالاستنباط من نصوص إمام مالك. And he's a mujtahid in the Maliki school, very high level. What's his name? Habib ibn al-Rabi' rahimahullah. Radiyallahu anhu, yani an Malik. What did Habib ibn al-Rabi' say? ادعاء التأويل ادعاء التأويل في لفظ صراح لا يقبل. It's the first typo I found in this copy here. So that means they did a very good job. Many pages, I didn't see a single typo yet. May Allah have mercy on them. He said, claiming an alternative interpretation for a blatant statement is not acceptable. Claiming an alternative interpretation for a blatant statement is not acceptable. Intaha. End quote. Subhanallah. Brother has here that Qurtubi passed away in 671. وفي الفتاوى الهندية, and it is documented in the Indian verdicts, that's Hanafi, ما نصه, quote, رجل كفر بلسانه طائعا, a person, a man, committed blasphemy by his tongue intentionally. وقلبه مطمئن بالإيمان, while his heart is firm with faith. يكون كافرا, he would be a blasphemer. ولا يكون عند الله مؤمنا, and he would not be to Allah a believer. كذا في فتاوى قاضي خان, and it's also documented like that in the verdicts of Qadi Khan. انتهى. End quote. وأما من نطق بكلام له معنيان, but as for someone who pronounces talk that has two meanings, أحدهما كفري والآخر ليس بكفري, one of those two meanings is blasphemous and the other is not at all blasphemous. فهذا إذا لم يرد المعنى الكفري فلا يكفر. Then this speaker, if he did not mean the blasphemous meaning, he does not blaspheme. فلا يكفر, he does not blaspheme. But is he sinful for saying that statement? Depends on the statements. But we just recently, not in this lesson, but yeah, in other lessons, we just recently reviewed that there's cases when it's going to still be haram, even if it's not blasphemy. Like what? Like if someone said, if I did such and such, I'd be a kafir. And he means I'll never do such and such. فَلَا يَكْفُرْ, he wouldn't blaspheme, but that's haram. Sheikh said that's a major sin. Or like to say to a believer, oh, kafir, oh, blasphemer. It means you act like a blasphemer, not that you are really one. فَلَا يَكْفُرْ, he doesn't blaspheme here. That's haram, major sin. And some other cases. مثال ذلك أن يقول شخص. An example of that is for a person to say, هذا خير من الله. This example works in Arabic. هذا خير من الله. The word min here could mean, we could translate it as from, or we could translate it as than, T-H-A-N. So if we translate min as from, then it comes out as this is goodness from Allah. And also here, khair could mean good. And khair could mean better. This one word could mean good, and it could mean better. So it's possible then that this statement means this is goodness from Allah. Meaning, إذا رأى نعمة, when one saw an endowment. كأن رأى عالما جليلا تقيا ناصحا للناس, like had he seen a scholar who's great and God-fearing and advising of the people, شفوقا عليهم, and he has compassion for them, يعني for their religion. فإنه إن أراد أنه خير من عند الله. So if the one who said this sentence, هذا خير من الله, if he meant that this scholar is something good from Allah, a blessing he is from Allah, فلا يكفر, then he would not blaspheme. ولا بأس بذلك, and there's not even anything wrong with saying that. That's not even going to be haram in this case. وهذا فهم من ينطق بها غالبا, and this is the understanding of who would say such a statement usually. وإن أراد به, and so if he meant by it, هذا خير من الله, this is better than Allah. But the words don't change in Arabic. هذا خير من الله, this is better than God. إن أراد به أن ذلك العالم هو أفضل من الله. So if he meant that this scholar is better than God, فيكفر, he blasphemes. ومثاله أيضا أن يقول شخص. Another example is for a person to say, تكره الصلاة على النبي. Also, this is an example that works in Arabic. تكره, disliked, is as-salah on the Nabi. As-salah on the Nabi. So the word salah could mean more than one thing. And the word Nabi could mean more than one thing. فإن هذا اللفظ يحتمل من حيث اللغة أن قول اللهم صل على محمد مكروه. This sentence, تكره الصلاة على النبي, it could bear the meaning from the perspective of language that for someone to say, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, oh Allah, raise the rank of Muhammad, that's disliked. وَهَذَا كُفْرٌ, that's blasphemy to say that that's disliked. وَيَحْتَمِلُ, so here, raise the rank of Muhammad, that's what's being called here the salah of God. Salawatullah, the salawats of God, the salah of God. That is his special mercies, his special mercies. ويحتمل أن الصلاة الشرعية مكروهة مكروهة على الأرض المرتفعة المحدودبة. And this same sentence, tukrahu salatu ala nabi, could bear the meaning that the religiously sanctioned prayer, it is disliked to perform it while standing upon a high mound. It is disliked to perform this prayer upon a high mound, like uneven land, in other words. Standing on elevated land that's like a hump, a mound. Standing on elevated land that's like a hump. Performing prayer on that is disliked. لأن النبي يطلق على الأرض المرتفعة المحدودبة, because the word nabi in Arabic language, besides being possibly meaning prophet, it could mean a high mound. فلا يكون كفرا. So then that statement, the very same statement, would not be blasphemy. It would be true. ولو قال تكره الصلاة على النبي محمد, but had someone said making salah on Prophet Muhammad is disliked, كفر كفرا صريحا, that person would then blaspheme explicitly. لا يقبل التأويل لتعين المعنى الأول. No alternative interpretation would be accepted because he would have specified by adding the name Muhammad in his sentence. He will have specified, he will have limited his statement to the first meaning. Wallahu a'lam. Let's stop there. Any question? Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
So, adding the name Muhammad after Nabi, one said that giving salam to the Prophet would dislike, what you say, dislike on haram or something?
No, that's going to be kufr. Yani, let me repeat here. The sentence is tukrahu salatu ala nabi. This sentence, tukrahu, disliked, is as-salatu, the salah on the nabi. Just that much alone, that could mean something kufr, or it could mean something that's absolutely true. So if a person said that and he means Muhammad, that is disliked to make salah on Muhammad, which would mean it's disliked to send the special salutations to Muhammad, then that's kufr. But if he means it's disliked to perform the religiously prescribed prayer on a high mound, that's not kufr, it's true. Shaykh is saying, if he said this sentence, tukrahu salatu ala nabi, and he adds the name Muhammad, ala nabi Muhammad, he adds the name Muhammad, then he limited the statement then to the first meaning, and it would be kufr. Because now he's only saying it's disliked to send the special supplications to or for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Thank you, I got it.
You're welcome.